tools and habitations. The most impressive records of tools and habitation sites are from later Canaan Canyon, Melkokonchar in Ethiopia and Oldoway Gorge in Tanzania, where numerous localities have been excavated over the past 30 years. The progression from simple pebble tools to intricate and perfect bifacial implements is well documented in this area. There are also inferences to be drawn on the probable social organization, in the sense of community, size and hunting preferences. At one locality, in Oldoway, remains of a stone structure, perhaps the base of a circular hut, were uncovered. There is an excellent date of 8 million years for this. At Melkokonchar, the raised platform, likewise circular, has been uncovered. The threshold of technological ability is difficult to pinpoint exactly, and at best one could only suggest that it occurred during the Pliocene, perhaps in relation to the adaptive response embodied by the differentiation of Homo. During the early Pleistocene, c. 6 million years ago, bifacial tools such as crude hand axes made their appearance. The development can be traced in situ at Oldoway and is supported by findings from other East African sites. Until recent times the first record of stone implements in Europe was of hand axes. In my opinion, the evidence available could suggest a migration of the hand axe people from Africa into Europe and Asia, during the early Pleistocene, or a little earlier. The subsequent development of stone implements is complex, with impressive records from most parts of the world. It is not proven but can be postulated that the post-Acheulean, or hand axe technologies can be related to the emergence of Homo sapiens. The 447 Methodology and African Prehistory. The association of stone implements with early hominid remains is rare, and many mid-Pleistocene and subsequent sites contain only one or two specimens, with certain impressive exceptions. It is clear that extraordinary advances have been made in recent years in the information recorded, and continuing investigations will presumably provide further evidence. There is obvious evidence for considerable morphological diversity in the Plio/Pleistocene hominids of Africa, which has been interpreted as a consequence of a Pliocene differentiation with different evolutionary trends persisting into the early Pleistocene. The presence of at least 3 contemporary species in East Africa might be established on both cranial and postcranial material, and any review must incorporate the analysis of the entire fossil collection. Table 18.1 lists Homo erectus materials known from Africa. Region: Northwest, 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 East, South. Country: Algeria, Morocco, 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 Tanzania, South Africa. Site: Turnefine, CD Abdurrahmani Rabak Timur Oldoway, Swarth K. Rans. Specimen details: 3 mandibles and fragment of skull, 2 fragments of mandible, mandible fragment and skull, mandible skull, some postcranial remains and a possible mandible and incomplete skull, and some fragments of mandible. 448. Plate by 8. I Australopithecus boise. Lateral view of cranium from Oldoway Gorge, Tanzania. OH5 Kenya National Museums. M. Plate 18.2 Australopithecus boise. Occlusal view of mandible from Kubiflora, Kenya and MDR 72G Kenya National Museums. Plate 18.4 Australopithecus africanus. Occlusal view of man. Plate 18.3 Australopithecus africanus. Dibble from Kubiflora, Kenya. Lateral view of cranium from Kubiflora, and MDR 992 Kenya National and MDR 1813 Kenya National Museums. Circumflex accent R. W SJ 9 pounds and JPJ. Bill 1 IR vertical line. 449. Plate 18.5 Homo erectus. Lateral view of cranium from Kubiflora, Kenya and MDR 3733 Kenya National Museums. CMS. Plate 18.6 Homo habilis. Lateral view of cranium from Kubiflora, Kenya and MDR 1470 Kenya National Museums. 450. Europe. English. Archaeological equivalents. 4. Corresponding levels. Industries: Southern Sahara, Western Sahara, East Africa, Maghreb. Present post-glacial, late stone age, age of metals. Present Present. Neolithic. Worm. Second Intermediate. AP. Paleolithic. Desertification, pluvial recurrence. Garian. Micaelian pluvial. Arabian. 3U3 vertical line OJ. Chris WVRM. Middle. Stone Age. Aterian Mousterian. Arid last Great Lakes. Soltanian. Arid. Post. Ganglion pluvial. Soltanian. 3U 330 JSBIJJSV. Arid. Chris. Hurst Intermediate. Mindel Chris Mindel Guns. Mindel. Early. Stone Age. Lower. Paleolithic. With. B. Facial. Tools. Guns donor. Guns donor. Earlier Stone Age. Archaic. Lower. Paleolithic with. Pebble. Culture. Sahara. Of the Great Lakes. Ubershan. Arid. Post. Canturine Recontorian pluvial. Taurishan. Arid. Post. Kamachan. Tensition Amarian. Maluian. Arid. Post. Korgaran. Silesian. 3U3 Dodge J3 IPPUV. Maluian. 3U 330 JSPJ3A /OQ. 451. The Prehistory of East Africa. J.E.G. Sutton. Research on Prehistory, Introduction to Methodology. It was on the eastern side of Africa that Indian emerged as an erect and tool-making animal around 3 million years ago. For this reason the history of this part of the world has been longer than elsewhere, and in particular the Stone Age here was more extended than in other continents and other parts of Africa. It began when the first hominids started to make recognizable tools of stone of predetermined shapes and patterns as a regular activity. This combination of bodily and mental powers to produce tools, in other words to improve biology, and the growing dependence on these extra biological, that is, cultural, abilities and activities are what distinguish man from other animals and define humanity. Man's evolution as a ground-living animal able to stand and move on 2 feet unlike the apes, monkeys and other quadruped or quadruminous mammals facilitated tool use and tool manufacture through freeing the arms and hands for holding, carrying, gripping and manipulation. More than that, these were essential developments for survival and success in the world, and especially to obtain and prepare food. Each new generation had to learn the accumulated cultural and technological skills and knowledge of its parents. Then it is likely that the very earliest humanly fashioned tools remained unknown, since they were so crude or indistinguishable from natural objects as to be unrecognizable. It is probable that other materials which have decayed beyond trace, such as wood, leather and bone, were used and worked at least as early as stone. However, advances with other materials must have been limited until man had mastered the basic skill of how to produce a sharp-edged practical cutting tool through striking and breaking a selected stone with precision with another stone or suitable hard object. Tool making, and humanity, may thus have begun somewhat before the date for which we have convincing evidence for these crucial developments. Our evidence consists then of the first recognizable stone tools, and this we must take as the beginning of the Stone Age, as it is called for convenience. This Stone Age lasted from about 1 million years ago down to that very recent phase of human history when stone was superseded by metal as the prehistory of East Africa essential material from which to develop a technology and make tools and produce sharp edges. This transition from a stone or lithic technology to a metal one took place at slightly different times all over the world. In Western Asia techniques of working copper began 6,000 to 9,000 years ago. In East Africa, iron, the first and only metal used regularly, was worked about 2,000 years ago. And you may wonder whether the term Stone Age is a really satisfactory one for a period which includes all but 1,000th part of the long stretch of time during which men have lived in East Africa and which, in any case, emphasizes the technological rather than the economic or cultural aspects of human development. It may be objected that it is much too broad in terms of time and too restricted in terms of culture. But there are answers to these objections, and Stone Age, as a term and concept, remains useful provided that certain things are understood. This very long period of time is known to us only from archaeological evidence, mostly stone artifacts, and since these are practically the only things which have survived from a period which had no written records or any oral tradition known to us, it was reasonable to choose for it the name which reflected its chief characteristic. The Stone Age was not a static period. That techniques evolved during the Paleolithic and Neolithic periods is regularly demonstrated by the changes and diversity in a range of stone tools, their efficiency and their methods of manufacture. We must therefore subdivide the Stone Age both chronologically and geographically. Collections of stone tools, if skillfully selected and displayed, can be fascinating to look at, but they tell us little unless arranged with a sense of chronology and development. Popular expressions such as living in the Stone Age or Stone Age man are also unhelpful if they are based on the false assumption that the man and his way of life remained the same throughout that long period of time. For the tool kits of Stone Age populations differed from period to period and region to region, and the populations themselves developed culturally and physically. The Stone Age witnessed mutations and differentiations in the human physique and brain, in the economy, social organization and culture, hand in hand with the advances in technique revealed by the archaeological evidence. One other observation to make at this point is that, while change in all periods of the Stone Age was very slow by modern standards, it was slowest of all in the earlier periods. The closer we come to the present age, the quicker the changes have been. The later periods saw regional specialization and diversification, which meant that from time to time features which had slowly developed in one region were carried in that particular form into another region, either by migration or by cultural contact, and could thus produce the illusion that a revolution had occurred. So, in terms of development, 2 or 3 generations at the end of the Stone Age might be equivalent to 500,000 at an early period. Hence, the study of the Stone Age is not simply concerned with stones or tools. Occasionally the archaeologist is fortunate in recovering other finds. 453. Methodology and African prehistory. These occur most commonly on living sites dating from the very end of the Stone Age, where direct evidence of cooking and eating may be preserved in the form of charcoal fragments from the hearth and broken animal bones. Early organic remains are extremely rare in Africa, except at a few sites where favorable mineral conditions caused fossilization of bones before they rotted. But even where he has only stones to work with, the archaeologist should attempt broader deductions from his evidence and wider interpretations, over much wider-ranging areas. In the first place, it is not the individual tools found that matter, but the tool kits, the whole range and variety recoverable from a site, be it a living place of a group, the temporary hunter's camp, or a workshop where tools were made. Usually far commoner than the finished tools are the waste flakes and stone cores, being the chips and lumps struck off the raw material during manufacture and the unusable remnants. These need to be studied together with the actual tools made, since they indicate the manufacturing techniques and the level of expertise. Also, these waste products were not always simply discarded. Often, especially in the earlier years of the Stone Age, many of these flakes happened to have knife-sharp edges and would, if their size and shape were convenient for handling, have supplemented the heavier finished tools and thus have formed an essential part of the cake. Merely to collect and study the more spectacular finished hand axes and cleavers leads to a sadly limited and grossly distorted picture of the technology and activities of prehistoric populations. By the later periods of the Stone Age, heavy core tools of the hand axe type had given way to smaller, more delicate and more precise stone implements, often intended for hafting into wooden shafts or bone handles. The stone pieces produced by expert preparation of the core or intricate reworking of the flame or blade struck off. Here it is equally essential, for analysis and deductions, to have as complete as possible an assemblage of the finished pieces together with the waste material. The range of stone tools with their various kinds of edges and points, for cutting, paring, skinning, scraping, boring, grooving, striking, chopping and digging, will even allowing for some obvious uncertainties in interpreting the actual purposes and uses, suggest other tools fashioned from perishable animal and vegetable materials used by that community. For instance, these tools suggest the preparation of animal skins which, once scraped clean of fat, dried and tanned, could be cut into leather ropes and thongs. In the catching, killing and skinning of animals, as well as in the preparation of the hide and the making of ropes and thongs, The variety of stone and wooden tools and weapons would have been required. Ropes and thongs could have been combined with stone tools to tie and bind missiles used in hunting or to secure, with the help of a vegetable gum, the stone's blade or point to the tip of a wooden spear or arrow shaft. Apart from such weapons, it is possible to reconstruct the COMMON composite tools, consisting of small intricately fashioned stone flakes and blades neatly fixed. 454. The prehistory of East Africa. NGUM into shafts and handles prepared from wood and bone. From the study of the lithic finds of the end of the Stone Age, although direct evidence of the wooden and bone parts rarely exists. But even earlier, before wooden and stone implements were combined and were therefore clumsier, they were none the less interdependent. The spear shaft, for instance, might or might not have had to be cut to the required length with a stone knife, yet it would certainly have needed planing or smoothing with a stone scraper or dressing tool and perhaps with a thong of leather or vegetable fiber before it could be suitable for holding and throwing. The preparation of the spear's point, moreover, would have required sharp stone tools, after which it could have been hardened by fire, as some of the specimens found indicate. In the later part of the Stone Age, the successful hafting of a stone point to a wooden spear shaft depended on delicate paring and grooving with precision tools. These are a few illustrations of what can be gained by intelligent and imaginative study of stone tools, to make them in fact less stony and more lively. It would be possible to expand the argument on the uses of prepared wood and skins to include tents and white breaks. Here, as with the tools and weapons just discussed, we are moving beyond a consideration of techniques towards the more general economic and cultural interpretation of the evidence and to reconstructions of the lives of the different hunting and food-gathering communities of the various periods of the Stone Age. One particular point to be made here is that throughout the Stone Age the majority of tools, even stone tools, were not weapons. Although hunting was always essential to provide protein except in those places where fish were plentiful and the means of catching them were known, the collecting of vegetable foods, and in particular the digging up of starchy roots and tubers, would have been equally important and would normally have contributed the larger part of the diet. The bulk of the tools were for these activities together with general domestic use and woodworking. Inability or difficulties in carrying water would have restricted the choice of campsites very significantly. A seasonal camp for a family group had to be close to a stream or lake. Such a site would, naturally, have been further blessed with richer vegetation and variety of foods and thus more attractive to game. A study of the techniques of the Stone Age periods can, with common sense and imagination, lend itself to the reconstruction of economic and cultural conditions. But it cannot be denied that the evidence, even for the latest part of the Stone Age in East Africa, is very scarce and that attempts at a broader interpretation are inevitably speculative. It is, indeed, necessary to resist wild theoretical conjectures. But, that accepted, there is no use bemoaning the lack of remains, rather what there are need to be faced shrewdly and imaginatively to see what facts and ideas can be deduced from them. Thus new approaches and the search for new evidence are stimulated. The remainder of this chapter considers some of the ways by which more information could be obtained and more interesting conclusions reached. Occasionally fossilized animal bones have been found on certain early 455 methodology and African prehistory sites and also unfossilized food bones in late Stone Age living places, notably under rock shelters. This provides direct evidence of the type of animal hunted and eaten. Sometimes, moreover, an examination of the bones for tool marks and fractures and even of the pattern in which the debris was found may suggest the methods by which the animal was butchered and consumed. But even such direct evidence can represent only a part of the story. For instance, small mammals and reptiles, birds and insects have been caught but there is no trace of them, either because their bones or hard parts were too fragile to survive or because the hunter devoured such small prey at the place of kill instead of carrying it to the camp. In the same way there is no trace of the honey, fruit, berries, nuts and even birds' eggs which would, similarly, have been eaten in the wild rather than brought home, with few, if any, stone tools needed for their collection and preparation. In fact, evidence of prehistoric remains of vegetable foods is very rarely obtained. Nevertheless, the diets of early hunter-gatherer populations must have been reasonably balanced, and a plausible reconstruction of them has also to be balanced by an intelligent assessment of both the actual archaeological finds and the food resources provided by the local environment. For certain regions, e.g. central Tanzania, the archaeological evidence for the hunter-gatherer way of life at the very end of the Stone Age is supplemented in a remarkable way by surviving examples of rock painting. Quite aside from the technical skill and artistic sense and maturity which many of these paintings demonstrate, they provide valuable information on the kind of animals hunted for food as well as on the methods of hunting them with spears, bows and arrows, and various types of traps. More rarely other food-getting activities seem to be shown, such as digging up roots and collecting honey. All this is most enlightening and vastly expands our vision of prehistoric life, especially since some of the activities portrayed in the paintings can be compared with the recent or current practices of the peoples of East Africa. The evidence provided by the paintings has to be considered along with the technological material which could serve an economic or cultural purpose. Once the pattern begins to emerge, we can start asking further questions about hunting, trapping and collecting methods and the size of the hunting band, and still further about the community as a whole, its territorial range and the type of social organization it created to maintain itself. The testing of conjectures of this kind is still at an experimental stage, so that the answers to these questions are rarely expressed with entire confidence. Nevertheless, definite progress is being made, and since progress depends on primary archaeological evidence, it must be collected by the most careful, systematic and, if possible, sophisticated methods available. Sites with stone tools are not rare in East Africa. They began to be recognized very early in the 20th century and, following the pioneer. 456. The Prehistory of East Africa. Survey work of the late Dr. Louis Leakey in Kenya in the 1920s. Increasing numbers of sites of all periods of prehistory have been discovered in the region. White discoveries can be expected. They are usually revealed by erosion or the disturbance of the land. The tools or waste flame are washed out of gullies, riverbeds or steep hillsides, or they are brought to the surface by cultivation, cattle hoofs or building activities. It is not only professional archaeologists who discover these sites and remains, more commonly amateurs, including farmers and students, come across them and collect the finds. Any site is worth noting and should be reported to the relevant educational or antiquities authority. All tools and other archaeological material collected should be deposited in a museum, where they can be available for study and comparison with other local collections. The practice of foreign archaeologists of removing their finds to museums in their home countries was never very prevalent in the case of East Africa, and has now, happily, ended. However, a few collections of East African material made early in this century are kept in European museums, though by far the greater and most valuable part of the East African archaeological record is housed in the national museums of the countries concerned. By itself a surface collection tells us little since the tools and waste pieces have been removed from their original positions. In addition, the collection itself is usually selective. Nevertheless, even a small surface collection is likely to contain clues, in the form of certain types and sizes of tools or of manufacturing methods, relating to the period of the Stone Age to which it belongs and of its cultural relationship to other known sites. This will help in determining whether a more detailed investigation and full-scale excavation would be worthwhile. Excavation needs to be planned and undertaken by archaeologists experienced in the type of site in question. However, as just shown, expert archaeologists depend on local information provided by amateurs and students. Moreover, the latter can often assist in an excavation and learn the skills. Only through correct methods, up-to-date techniques of excavation and examination of the finds, both in their original place and after their recording and removal, can the archaeologist recover the maximum amount of information from a site and provide the fullest possible, if not exhaustive, picture of what went on there. It deserves to be noted here that some of the revealing excavation work on earlier Stone Age sites in East Africa undertaken in recent years has helped set the style, in method, analysis and interpretation, for research in other parts of the world. The excavating archaeologist, then, is concerned not so much with finding individual specimens as with finding out as much as possible about the way of life of a former community, through identifying and exhaustively studying as much as possible of the cultural assemblage and gaining all available information on the environmental setting. This may demand very slow and meticulous excavation methods, If all the objects are to be recovered and all the features of a living floor, including slight irregularities in the surface or 457. Methodology and African prehistory. Color changes in the soil which might indicate fire or some other activity, are to be recognized. Where small objects, including stone flakes, bone splinters and even vegetable seeds, are expected or likely to occur, it is commonly necessary to sieve the soil. This is a very frequent practice in late Stone Age rock shelters where the deposits tend to be very soft and ashy. Usually in a rock shelter, and frequently in open sites, the materials do not represent a single occupation but successive ones, each leaving its rubbish on top of that of the last and requiring separate study. The excavator has therefore to pay very careful attention to the stratigraphy, for, if an object of one period of occupation should be muddled with those of another, the interpretation will be sadly distorted. While the responsibility for identifying, recording and studying all finds lies with the excavator himself, he will still need the assistance of other scientists. Some of this assistance, such as the identification of animal bones, may be undertaken later in a laboratory. Similarly, should the excavator, through the luck of preservation, come across vegetable remains, for instance carbonized seeds and nuts or pieces of wood, he will need to dispatch them to a botanical expert after specially treating them on the spot. The identification and study of samples of this kind will add to information on the diet and economy of the community. But equally important will be what they reveal about the environment at that time. If by chance ancient Holland should have been preserved, the palynological examination will illustrate the vegetation which then existed and changes which have occurred in it. Similarly revealing can be soil samples containing microscopic organisms or snail shells. These also help to identify the type of vegetation which prevailed, and hence the climate of the time. Studies of the geology, geomorphology and soil structure are also useful in reconstructing the ancient environment and the resources which a prehistoric community could have exploited. Clearly much of this environmental investigation, if it is to be at all thorough and reliable, benefits from the presence of these various experts at the excavation site at least for part of the time. For it is not just the samples collected and taken to the laboratories which contain the clues. The samples have to be carefully selected and controlled in the context of the site. Big changes may have taken place in the landscape between the period under study and the present day, either because of climatic change or geological action, or more frequently because of human activities, notably cultivation and associated forest, or bush clearance in recent times. But the approach to the past must always be through an intelligent study of the situation of the site as found and of all the clues, archaeological and other, which it contains. There are other studies which are relevant, for, even if they provide no direct evidence, they throw valuable indirect light on the prehistoric period. The first of these is anthropological research among the few existing hunter-gatherer societies in the world, and especially those in Africa. In 458, the prehistory of East Africa. Fact, the number of suggestions outlined above were prompted, explicitly, or implicitly, by the way of life of modern hunter-gatherers, such as the Herbza of northern Tanzania and the San of the Kalahari, to which researchers have been turning attention in recent years. The ways of the Herbza and San provide many useful insights on the probable viability, organization and constraints of the hunting and gathering mode of life, and suggest many points which would otherwise have eluded the archaeologist's mind. Nevertheless, W.E. would be sadly mistaken in regarding these communities as exact replicas of Stone Age societies or as mere survivals from that age. It is true, of course, that certain of the present-day hunter-gatherer groups, notably the San of southern Africa, still reflect the conditions of late Stone Age populations, and can therefore shed light on some of the problems of that period. For instance, the not infrequent find in late Stone Age contexts is a stone with a circular hole bored through it. The San today sometimes use these bored stones as weights for sharpened wooden sticks for digging up edible roots, and there are apparently rock paintings in South Africa which illustrate this use. But specific correlations of this sort are rare. Also, changes have taken place in San society for various reasons, including contact, close or distant, with peoples using iron and living in a food-producing economy. Very few San continue to work stone regularly, for iron is obtainable from trade or scrap, and this inevitably causes modifications at technological and cultural levels. Other surviving hunter-gatherer groups have intermixed more intimately with food-producing populations, while others again are barely aboriginal, having reverted in recent times to this way of life in the backwoods and maintaining themselves by exchange of forest products with their agricultural and pastoral neighbors. This reciprocal dependence has been the case with many of the groups known as the Robo, which still exist in the highlands of Kenya and northern Tanzania. These examples show the dangers of drawing parallels between modern hunter-gatherer populations and those of recent prehistory, dangers multiplied when considering the remotest ages. Yet, in spite of the dangers, the insights provided on the food resources of the land and the organization necessary for exploiting them are valuable. Another invaluable source of information is to be found in the lives and societies of primate animals, notably of man's nearest living relatives, the two African apes, chimpanzees and gorilla, as well as those of baboons. The latter are monkeys and much less closely related to man biologically, but behaviorally they are of special interest for the study of human society since, more than most other primates, they live in groups much of the time on the ground. They are consequently easy to observe. NOW, as explained elsewhere, man did not descend from these apes and monkeys, and it is not suggested here that any prehistoric communities, not even the earliest ones, were significantly closer to them than modern man are. Yet, in reflecting on the basic behavior of primates and the habits which man inherited from his pre-human ancestors, and also in trying to understand how these immediate 459 methodology and African prehistory ancestors of man, who lacked the ability of making and using tools, got their vegetarian living. There are numerous ideas to be gleaned from these field studies, a large number of which have been carried out in East Africa. Prehistory, as we have stressed, was enormously long, and the human populations of the end of it were vastly advanced and quite distinct from those of early men at the opening of prehistory. Moreover, the late Stone Age inhabitants of eastern Africa, some of whom remained in existence till very recent times, were distinctively African. Some were related to the San, others have been assimilated into the modern Negroid Iron Age populations. By contrast, the people of the early Stone Age, and especially those of its earliest stage, though well represented in East Africa and for a long time confined to this part of the world, were also ancestral to mankind as a whole. For these earliest stone tool makers, whose bones have been found in the lowest layers at Oldoway Gorge in northern Tanzania and in the Lake Turkana region of northern Kenya and southern Ethiopia, are usually classified as Homo. However, in both body and brain they were distinct from modern man Homo sapiens sapiens. The early history of East Africa is thus also the history of mankind, and it is this element which gives it a worldwide significance. Since it contains such invaluable information on early man and his culture, as well as on primate ecology, East Africa has very properly become the world center for research into the life, environment and origin of man. Chronology and classification. Whereas in most of Asia, Europe and northern Africa the Stone Age is divided conventionally into Paleolithic, Mesolithic and Neolithic, in Africa south of the Sahara this system has been abandoned by most modern writers. Here the Stone Age is usually viewed and studied in three broad periods: early, middle, late, distinguished largely by important and recognizable changes in technology which have of course broader cultural and economic implications. These differences in classification are not two ways of saying the same things conceptually and chronologically. 2. The criteria of classification are completely different. See Table 19.2, page 464, and the notes related to it. The three African periods are dated very approximately as follows. Early Stone Age, from the time of the earliest stone tools, say 3 million years ago till about 100,000 years ago. Middle Stone Age, from around 100,000 to 15,000 years ago. Late Stone Age, from about 15,000 years ago until the beginning of the Iron Age, which occurred in most regions 2,000 years ago. The approximate nature of this dating must be emphasized, and also the fact of its being subject to some controversy. Hitherto rather later dates have 460, 500 kilometers land over 500 meter. Early Stone Age and Early Middle Stone Age to Late Stone Age and Late Middle Stone Age. Figure 19. 1. East Africa. Important Stone Age sites. 461. methodology and African prehistory usually been suggested for the transition from the Middle to the Late Stone Age, and more particularly that from the Early to the Middle Stone Age. This conservative approach arose in part from the scarcity of satisfactorily defined, described and dated sites and lithic collections, combined with the problem that the first transition Early to Middle Stone Age occurred at a time for which radiocarbon testing provides no accurate dating. Though dates of 50,000 to 60,000 years have been obtained and are frequently cited, it is likely that these are minimum, rather than strictly reliable, dates. In fact, the detailed chronology not only of the beginnings of the Middle Stone Age, but also of the whole latter part of the Early Stone Age, remains highly uncertain. NEW techniques, explained elsewhere in this volume, are being tried out. The He potassium argon method in particular has already helped in providing a rough chronological framework for periods over 500,000 years ago. Usually, however, it is necessary to fall back on relative dating deduced from archaeological and geological stratigraphies and typology. For these reasons the datings suggested here for the division of the Stone Age into periods are rather longer than those found in most previous standard accounts. But they are not so radical as some students of the subject contend they should be. Even the revisionist school is less radical than it may appear, since the issues raised relate more to definitions than to real dates. The dates for the division of the Stone Age into early, middle and late periods are imprecise and controversial. In addition, it would be wrong to imagine that they were internally static or unvariegated, or that the changes from one to the next were necessarily sudden. Developments took place within each of the three periods as well as from one to another. Moreover, the transitions from early to middle Stone Age technologies, and from middle to late Stone Age, were complex. In recognition of this, some writers speak of intermediate periods. The recent tendency, however, has been to drop these intermediates as official periods in the Stone Age chronological scheme. The second intermediate, between middle and late Stone Age, was always a rather unsatisfactory definition in any case. The first intermediate, comprising the industries known as forestsmith and sandgoan, is sometimes viewed now as a terminal phase of the early Stone Age, but is here included in an expanded Middle Stone Age. This helps explain the older dating of the opening of the latter in this account. This dropping of the term intermediate is merely a matter of convenience and does not betoken a more simple view of human technological, cultural or economic development in prehistory. Quite the opposite view was becoming increasingly recognized. First, in all epochs of the Stone Age variant technologies could be practiced contemporaneously, even within restricted regions. In certain cases these variants can be explained by differences in the environment, with one technological tradition emerging in, say, woodland or waterside situations and a distinct, contemporary one in drier or more open areas, where the food resources and methods of obtaining them would have. 462. The prehistory of East Africa dictated a different cultural adjustment and technology. But the probable explanation might not always be so neat. Sometimes the various activities undertaken by a single community, hunting of larger or smaller game, trapping, digging roots and tubers, working wood and leather, some of which were seasonal, appear sufficient to account for different types of toolkits of similar date in a particular locality. On the other hand, there may be differences indicating much deeper cultural divergences and economic specializations, maintained conceivably by distinct communities or races, or, in early Stone Age times, different species of Homo. This is a controversial subject. Nevertheless, the most recent discoveries in East Africa show that what were once regarded as two essentially discrete subperiods of the early Stone Age, the pebble tool or old Owen culture succeeded by, or evolving into, the hand axe or Acheulean culture, overlapped for a very long time, lasting at the very least 500,000 years. It is difficult to stretch the activity pattern theory to embrace this evidence satisfactorily, and some scholars would interpret it as representing the distinct cultural traditions of two quite separate populations existing side by side but exploiting different food resources. Furthermore, overlapping is discernible between the arbitrary divisions into early, middle and late Stone Age. You may find early Stone Age tool types or evidence of early manufacturing techniques in an essentially Middle Stone Age assemblage. The mixture of innovatory and conservative features might be a sign of gradual change. But signs of transition do not always exist. On some sites with clear stratigraphy successions, it can happen that a new technology appears suddenly in developed form without any trace of local evolution. This suggests cultural diffusion from one region to another, possibly but not necessarily resulting from the movement of populations. Climatic change which affected the environment was also a stimulus to cultural adjustment and technological advance, but here the archaeologist has to beware of adducing simplistic determinist interpretations. This rather arbitrary periodization of the Stone Age is therefore a useful scale of reference in the present state of knowledge, but one which must be kept flexible in order to accommodate constant modifications. Yes, so any day it may outlive its uses. Though that day has probably not arrived yet, the scale's usefulness is in danger of being undermined by those who would apply it too formally or rigorously to achieve results for which it was never designed. In Table 19.2, a more detailed scale is presented to illustrate how the various Stone Age cultures and lithic industries recognized by archaeologists in East Africa should fit into this tripartite periodization. This is offered as a guide to current knowledge and the main studies and makes no pretense of being a correct interpretation or one that will survive the results of further research or revaluations of older work. It must be seen simply as a guide and as a flexible one at that. Certain of the cultures named here and others 1. See in particular the account of the Middle Stone Age, pages 472-5, 463. TQ. 8. Be greater than W4. Question mark J. I5H. U is circumflex accent AI asterisk circumflex accent greater than O greater than U. OS.230 GAH. PH. II. Pounds by 307 asterisk HJP. 3 to H asterisk G 53 centimeters OD3. P3HA. S. Dale backslash J Eve 73. G9 V8. SA the BDU. ZWO Co WXNOI. Slash greater than SI so WHP. II. U negative 3. I. Underscore O. Upper Paleolith. AP Paleomesolith Neolithic. Peatlands. Some. Pipe. WWCD2XXBO. WJWQZQ code. IQZWOOTO3WXCOOH11. W1 circumflex accent 05. WZO. Calls. WWZ at HOWS. II. 000. 464. The prehistory of East Africa. Deliberately omitted may have been given a separate identity on the basis of inadequate research or descriptions, occasionally with only one site well investigated or described so that their validity as units may be in doubt. Others are enormously extensive, whether temporally or geographically or both. The Echeulean of the early Stone Age spans more than 1 million years in eastern Africa, and it extends not only right across the continent but also into a large part of southern and western Eurasia. In the first phase of the Middle Stone Age, the Sangoan stretched from parts of eastern and southern Africa to the far west of the continent. The Mong later industries represented in East Africa, still the Eve and Wilton were first described and named in the Cape Province of South Africa. Experts on these may prefer to give the East African variants new and distinct names. But in this account a more comprehensive approach is preferred, some obvious problems and likely revisions being noted at the appropriate points. Those so wishing can follow up the new developments and debates beginning with the works listed in our bibliographies, and can then proceed to try to apply more sophisticated terminologies. Notes to Table 19.2. Table 19.2 is devoted to terminology. Terminology by itself tells one nothing, and to set too much store by it would be a disservice to understanding. But the Stone Age as a prehistoric period can only be known to us and sensibly discussed and studied through terms and symbols invented by archaeologists. Any serious attempt to understand this period and its vast literature, therefore, whether viewed as a whole or analyzed in detail, demands a grasp of the terminologies used by various writers, inconsistent and injudicious though some may be. The HE to right-hand columns, knowing rough correlations with geological periods and with the Mediterranean, Northern African and Eurasian system of periodizing the Paleolithic, are included merely for reference, especially in relation to other chapters in this volume and other publications including old works on East African archaeology. These two columns are not necessary for a reading of this chapter by itself. The terms lower, middle and upper, in which lower is the earliest, follow normal geological practice based on stratigraphy sequences. In most geological, and many archaeological, works, therefore, such tables are set out in logical succession from bottom to top. The present table is ordered from top to bottom to conform with historical time charts. As the table shows, the term Paleolithic or Old Stone Age is not the equivalent of the African Early Stone Age. Paleolithic, as first used in Europe and still used, means Stone Age without food production, in contrast to Neolithic or NEW Stone Age meaning Stone Age with food production, i.e. agriculture and or pastoralism before the use of metals. A somewhat different interpretation of Neolithic, which is occasionally encountered. 465. Methodology and African prehistory prefers the criterion of advanced material culture, notably pottery or ground stone, to specific evidence of food production. In some parts of the world a transitional period or cultural backwater, as some would see it, is recognized and called Mesolithic. This is not relevant here, except to note that it has no connection whatever with the African Middle Stone Age and all too frequent error in general writings on African history. In almost all of Africa south of the equator, as in most of East Africa, there was no equivalent of the Neolithic of other parts of the world, since food production did not spread until the opening of the Iron Age. However, in the highlands of Kenya and northern Tanzania there is evidence of food production herding, if not a little agriculture too in the terminal late Stone Age 2000 to 3000 years ago. This, with its pottery and stone bowls, see the end of the chapter, is labeled Neolithic in some studies. A.I. Early Stone, the GE First Phase. The earliest known humanly fashioned tools date from between 2, if not 3, million years ago and less than 1 million, and have been found by the edges of former lakes and marshes close to the Rift Valley in northern Tanzania and Kenya. These were hand-sized pebbles and stone chunks from which a few planks were struck off with another stone to produce crude but usable cutting implements. Heavy work such as cutting through an animal skin or breaking or crushing tough vegetable material would normally have required the use of the main tool held in the fist. Meny flanks commonly, but incorrectly, described as waist being thinner and hence sharper, would have been suitable for lighter and more precise work such as preparing the kill for food, making wooden weapons, or in domestic work in the camp. In fact, more intense studies of these so-called chopper, or paddle tool industries, notably by Dr. Mary Leakey at Oldaway Gorge where they occur in the lowest levels, reveal greater variety of tool types and technological sophistication than has been assumed hitherto. The HE description chopper tool does not do real justice to the implement, nor is the term paddle tool culture, frequently used for this phase of the early Stone Age, accurate, especially since the stones chosen for manufacturing the choppers, flanks and other tools were not always pebbles. Moreover, bones, and doubtless wood too, were used. Most archaeologists prefer therefore to call this phase Oldowan, after Oldaway in northern Tanzania where such tools were first recognized and described. Figure 19.2. This does not mean, of course, that they were first made at Oldaway. 3. At one time it was thought that the makers of these pebble tools were able to hunt and kill only small game, such as birds, lizards, tortoises and hyrax. 2. Many authors do not share this opinion. 3. The strange spelling Oldowan is derived from the German form of the name Oldaue, found on early maps. The place name is Maasai one in origin, more correctly rendered Olduvai. 466. The prehistory of East Africa. IO equals 3. Figure 19.2. Early Stone Age, first phase, typical Oldowan pebble tools. To supplement their fruit, vegetable and insect collecting. It is now evident that they butchered large animals too. Among the fossilized bones found with the tools at or close to campsites are those of elephants and large antelopes. Some of these beasts may have died naturally or been crippled by accident or killed by lions or other predators, but it is likely that others were at this early stage caught in traps or driven into waterside mires by hunting parties which would have completed the kill with wooden spears and clubs, and perhaps stone missiles. Part of the meat was doubtless consumed by the hunters at the place of kill, but some of it must have been carried back to the camp to be shared by the rest of the group including women and children. For the rubbish which has survived often includes the bones of several different animals together with a variety of cutting, scraping and pounding tools, thus constituting most remarkable evidence that in this, the earliest stage of humanity, the idea of a home base already existed. Furthermore, study of the scattered patterns of the rubbish suggests that actual windbreaks were set up, while at Oldaway a rough circle of stones is believed to have been the base for a wooden frame of a hut or shelter, perhaps covered with skins. At Melkoconcher, an artificial platform may have served the same purpose. Besides being known from several East African former lakesides extending from Oldaway to later Cana, where the earliest sites yet known exist, pebble tool deposits have been discovered from South Africa right up to the shores of the Mediterranean. They may date from a more evolved stage than the earliest in East Africa. It is likely then, but not absolutely certain, that this tool making began in Central or Eastern Africa and then. 467. Methodology and African prehistory spread to the whole of the continent. In view of the dating of these tools, and more significantly their occasional discovery in East Africa together with actual human bones, they can be attributed to the earliest hominids, the Australopithecines, or, as some would now argue strongly, to Homo habilis specifically. For the two early Stone Age second phase via shoe-lean or hand axe culture is as widespread in Africa as the Old Owen, and the sites are much more numerous. This might be due to greater populations, but equally to the increasing manufacture of large recognizable tool forms. Figure 19.3. Unlike the Old Owen, the shoe-lean extends beyond Africa into Western and Southern Asia and also Southern and Western Europe. Its beginnings in Africa date from more than 1 million years ago. This type of technology continued for over 1 million years until relatively recent times, that is, probably not more than 1,000,000 years ago. This million years was marked by worldwide climatic variations, 5, and it is not likely that all the regions in which the shoe-lean tools have been found were continuously occupied. Eastwards of India, moreover, true shoe-lean industries are rare or non-existent, and it appears that Eastern Asia persisted with a distinct stone technology more akin to the advanced pebble tool type. This may represent an important cultural divergence between East and West. These shoe-lean industries, in which the hand axe is the best known tool, are usually associated with Homo erectus, a form of man intermediate between the Australopithecines and modern man. However, by the end of the shoe-lean phase, the evolution from Homo erectus to early types of Homo sapiens was already in train. Africa was one of the places where Homo erectus emerged. His appearance was accompanied by a cultural evolution shown by the improved shoe-lean tool-making techniques and the more efficient way of life they introduced, although, no doubt, older cultural traditions and probably the earlier physical types persisted for some time alongside the new. This point is best illustrated in the successive layers of ancient lake beds at Oldaway, where for several hundreds of thousands of years either side of 1 million years ago discrete Old Owen and shoe-lean tool kits were being made and used. The shoe-lean, moreover, contains numerous stages and variations, but for general purposes only the main division is significant, that is, the division between the cruder or simpler early shoe-lean and the evolved shoe-lean, to which belong the most beautifully manufactured hand axes and cleavers. Selections of these tools are displayed in the East African museums, those from Isimila in the southern highlands of Tanzania being among the world's finest. Clearly, evolved shoe-lean must have begun by developing at some